Hey there, everyone. Today we're going to be talking again about the 10th plateau of Deleuze and Guattari's 1,000 Plateaus. This is becoming intense, becoming animal, becoming imperceptible. And like we left off in the last lecture, they're talking about difference, and they're talking about becoming, and they're trying to focus on an ontology in which difference is not reduced to sameness, it's not reduced to some kind of structuralist interpretation. And in order to do this, they bring in the idea of the plane of consistency or the plane of immanence. And it's important to note, they use this term in Anti-Oedipus, although they use a different term for this same term, the body without organs. And they explicitly state on page 270 of the Minnesota University Press one, the plane of consistency is the body without organs. So these are the same thing. And I'm kind of ambivalent about whether or not I like them using different terms to mean exactly the same thing. They're not exactly the same thing, and that's why I'm kind of on the fence, because it does plug into their other vocabulary in different ways. But this ontological concept is really interesting because it's going to give us a framework for talking about how can Deleuze and Guattari talk about a univocity of being without necessarily reducing things to some kind of structural interpretation, to some kind of stable monism. Because I talked about in the last lecture, they talk on page 20 about the formula pluralism equals monism, and they kind of throw it out there and go beyond it. I actually really like that they do that because you learn about it throughout the work, and I think it makes much more sense to simply gradually approach the concept as you go through the work rather than them just trying to give you an explanation that won't make any sense until you get 250, 270 pages into this work. But the plane of consistency is a way of talking about the fact that becomings will only produce itself, as they talked about earlier. That becomings are everywhere, and that everything that is stable is in fact defined by becoming. That becoming produces nothing other than itself. They say this on page 238. And in order to do this, they're talking about a plane in which all this difference plays out. And they give us very few imperatives, but they do say schizoanalysis, or pragmatics, has no other meaning. Make a rhizome. But you don't know what you can make a rhizome with. You don't know which subterranean stem is effectively going to make a rhizome or enter a becoming. People your desert. So experiment. I love this part about their philosophy because it is so open and so up to interpretation depending on the assemblage or milieu that you're within. And as such, they want us to tarry with all these differences, all these different flows that allow us to be and to become. They want us to be able to lay all these out. And where do we lay all these out on? The plane of consistency. They say, far from reducing the multiplicity's number of dimensions to 2, the plane of consistency cuts across them all, intersects them in order to bring into coexistence any number of multiplicities with any number of dimensions. The plane of consistency is the intersection of all concrete forms. Therefore, all becomings are written like sorcerers' drawings on this plane of consistency, which is the ultimate door providing a way out for them. So, this plane of consistency is where all the difference happens. And it is defined by nothing else but the differential flows that play out upon it. It is merely this field where everything happens, and it's not a theater, it's not a matter of representation, but it's a sort of open hand that lets difference play out. And we're going to get into this a little bit because this is one of their more difficult metaphysical concepts, but it's one of the most important for understanding their philosophy in a very concrete way. Now, their ontology is focused on being non-hierarchical. And what this means is they're not searching for perfection of forms. And in order to do this, they lay out an ontology that focuses on what they say is pure materials that enter into various combinations, forming a given organ and assuming a given function depending on their degree of speed or slowness. They elaborate later, species as kinematic entities that are either precocious or retarded. Even the question of fertility is less one of form and function than speed. Do the paternal chromosomes arrive early enough to be incorporated into the nuclei? So this is kind of what they were getting at in the very first page of Anti-Oedipus when they talk about it fits and starts, it shits and it fucks. The plane of consistency, the body without organs, what ontology is instantiated upon. It's merely this place where kinematics, pragmatics play themselves out. It is a material reality where we have, when they talk about pure materials, they specifically mean pure flows, these pure differential intensities which necessarily establish a peopling, as we talked about in the last lecture, and is going to enter various combinations and form organs. So there we go. Organs will form on the body without organs, but the body without organs will resist this organization if it can. It will focus on these irreducible becomings that are going to shoot through the organs. So they elaborate, in any case, there is a pure plane of immanence, univocality, composition, upon which everything is given, upon which unformed elements and materials dance, that are distinguished from one another only by their speed, and that enter into this or that individuated assemblage depending on their connections, their relations of movement. A fixed plane of life upon which everything stirs, slows down, or accelerates. A single abstract animal, with a capital A, for all the assemblages that effectuate it. So, this plane of immanence, or this body without organs, it just sits here and it lets things dance upon it. It does not resist anything except organization, which is to say, it resists becoming an organism. This plane of consistency is defined by it has a consistency as defined by the flows that make up that consistency. And it is pure immanence. It is the here and now, tarrying with the here and now, and speeding up and slowing down. Fitting and starting, shitting and fucking, as they said before. And to continue their critique of structuralism, they say it is a question not of organization, but of composition, not of development or differentiation, but of movement and rest, speed and slowness. It is a question of elements and particles which do or do not arrive fast enough to effect a passage, a becoming, or jump on the same plane of pure immanence. I'm going to pause there for a second because it's important to note here that a becoming is not a perfected state. It is merely something that you're either fast enough in a given flow to reach that sort of valence, or you're not. There are speedings up and slowings down that will allow for different becomings to come about. And it's important that if we want to allow those becomings to about, we realize the ontology consists of variable intensities, of speeding up and slowing down, and acting upon this plane of immanence. They continue, and if there are in fact jumps, rifts between assemblages, it is not by virtue of their essential irreducibility, but rather because there are always elements that do not arrive on time, or arrive after everything is over. Thus, it is necessary to pass through fog, to cross voids, to have lead times and delays. which are themselves part of a plane of immanence. Even the failures are part of the plane. And when they say failures here, it is important that they are using it in a very loose sense. They do not think that this is a genuine failure insofar as being schizophrenic is an idealistic state. They think that sometimes we should be schizo, in effect, and sometimes we should be filial and Oedipal. That there's this constant dance, like they've talked about before, that is occurring on this plane of immanence, and that we have to understand things don't always arrive in time for there to be a becoming, and that's okay. There is a time and a place for every becoming, and that is an important political thing to point out, that revolutions have to occur at the right time, there has to be the right conditions, and it does not occur on this large scale, like 1917 October Revolution kind of thing. That is not where a revolution happens. Revolution happens at the interstices, at these small little junctures, at these jumps and rifts between assemblages, which simply occur because we've got all this variability happening. They say, we must try to conceive of this world in which a single fixed plane, which we shall call a plane of absolute immobility or absolute movement, is traversed by non-formal elements of relative speed that enter this or that individuated assemblage, depending on their degrees of speed and slowness. A plane of consistency, peopled by anonymous matter, by infinite bits of impalpable matter entering into varying connections. So varying connections, this is the foundation of their ontology. Varying connections is the rule, not formal immobilizations, but varying connections in which there is a constant peopling occurring. There is a constant social relationship in which on this plane of immanence or plane of consistency, what they call a plane of absolute immobility or movement, which is to say that things are either speeding up or slowing down. They're in this relation like that. And these non-formal elements are what is driving formal structures to come about. Things like the state, things like the body. I mean, think about this on a biological level with homeostasis, with an organism achieving equilibrium and being able to continue to carry out its processes. This is a semi-stable state which is surrounded on both sides by chaos. By, oh, you've reached too low or too high of a pH, you'll dissolve. You've reached too low or high of a temperature, you dissolve. You have had too little or too much nutrients, you dissolve or explode or cease to be. These stable states are the result of all sorts of varying connections, which will allow for formal systems to come about only as an emergent property. The formal systems are not the condition for multiplicity, but multiplicity is the condition for formal systems. So this is a very short lecture, and I could go on a lot longer, but I wanted to make this digestible and interesting. So I hope this gives you some thoughts about how exactly we can deal with multiplicity and difference, and how we can do it in a non-dogmatic way, in which we're not always focused on revolution, and we're not always focused on stagnation. We're focused on this very in der Welt sein, being in the world, process, in which we are tarrying with the reality we've been given. So please leave any comments or constructive or non-constructive criticism in the comments below, and watch some of my other lectures, especially the one before this if you didn't, and I'll see you in another lecture.